Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Money Matters TV. We have an especially good show lined up for you today. I'm Patricia Dunn from the Dunn Group at Merrill Lynch Wealth Management, located in West Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. And my co-host today is Rich Sichel from the Philadelphia Trust Company. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And our special guest today is John Farley, who is the Director of Cybersecurity Risk for Gallagher. And Gallagher happens to be the third largest global insurance brokerage firm. Cybersecurity is certainly on everybody's mind, so we'll be looking forward to talking to John. But starting today, Rich and I had been having several conversations leading up to this show because we're in exactly the same part of the financial industry. And we were discussing how after having had two bear markets within a single decade, 2000 to 2001 and 2007 to 2008, come 2010, the industry changed. And the industry changed because investors wanted more different types of ways to invest their money. And basically, the industry broke itself up into 4 different segments. And we have a slide that explains that. Now, I've gone over this with you before, but for those who haven't seen our show, this may be new information. Our pyramid here, the largest section, the bottom section, is basically either no advice or reactionary opinion, not advice. And this is where you find all your self-directed operations and your traditional brokerage, what I like to call, have I got a stock for you? The total focus for the investor at this level is building a collection of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The next level up, the orange one, is automated advice. And more people are familiar with that through their 401k at work, where you answered a few questions and the computer gave you a portfolio, not individual stock selections, but actually a well-balanced portfolio. You're not dealing with a human being. Everything is computer generated and will put you on a path, hopefully, to success. The next level is generic advice, the yellow-green cube there. This is the financial services industry's answer to things like the medical clinic or LegalZoom, where the investor can get a human on demand. It is all initiated by the investor. There is no two-way door here. When someone wants to speak to a professional, they call an 800 number and get whoever answers the phone. And it's a licensed person and they can give you generic advice. But like a minute clinic, it's a case of next. And these folks can handle up to 1,000 different clients, or not really clients, customers over the course of a year. And then finally at the top is where you find Rich and myself, and that is personalized advice. Now, in both the automated and the generic advice levels, the focus is on a portfolio. At our level, the focus is on your net worth and growing that net worth. And it involves wealth management, financial planning, net worth building, protecting, and transferring to the next generation or to the charities of your choice. And unlike generic advice, typically we have somewhere around 100 to 150 clients, and we work with them literally for decades. Now, when this happened in 2010, I think the industry naively thought that your 20-something would start out with the no advice level and have a good time doing some stock picking or getting involved with traditional brokerage that may have a stock for you. But then towards their late 30s, early 40s, people have a family. They want to move up into, hey, it's time to get more serious, but I'm not ready to talk to a human yet. So let's get involved with a portfolio that is computer generated. And then towards the end of their 40s to early 50s, things are getting serious. Hey, retirement's not that far away. Maybe it's time I go to a clinic and get some of these basic questions answered. And then late 50s, early 60s, that's when they would come to someone like Rich or myself, because now it's deadly serious and lives are complicated. But what's interesting that we're seeing now is that did not happen. What happened since 2010 is investors sought out their comfort level, one of those four levels, and they stayed there. They did not move up. Each one attracted their own. But now, 12 years into a bull market, Rich and I are both seeing a new phenomenon. The investor is changing before the bear market. And in our next slide, you'll see what we have been discussing this past week. What we're finding is that people down at the lowest level, the self-directed and or the traditional brokerage, are wanting to bypass the other two and come right up to a net worth focus. But what's interesting is that their previous experience, which is decades long now, does not prepare them for what they will receive at our level. Now, I listed 6 things that I've heard from these folks. These are real things that people have said to me, and I'm sure Rich has some things to add. But recently, someone said to me when I asked them, why would you want to step up to a higher level of service? And they said to me, I can't figure out what it is I'm paying for. I'm providing more stock ideas than my broker is providing me. I thought, well, that's interesting. Another one, if we could go back to the slide here for a second, is I was really given bad advice. And in this case, it was bad advice over 12 years. I was told that I could not have an IRA because I make too much money. It turns out it was bad advice, and I missed out on a planning opportunity for the past 12 years. Another one was when I said, why are you paying for your college out of pocket? Why don't you have a 529? They said to me, well, no one ever told me that there was a tax advantage to funding a 529. Another one said, I'm getting near retirement and I'm afraid my stock collection of my most favorite things could make me vulnerable in a downturn. We've had 12 years of a bull market. It has to come in here somewhere. And this one was fascinating. This was last August. I talked to someone who said they were smarter than the average bear. They had gone to cash in March of 2020, and now in August, after the market had recouped 70% of its losses, they were still sitting in cash and afraid to go back into the market. And when I made our proposal on wealth management and what we do and how we're focused on the net worth, he came back and said to me, that's not exciting. And I ended up scratching my head. This is not online casino gambling. This is not exciting. It's disciplined. It's done over time. It's done with the market risk taken into consideration. And then most recently, and I'm sure, Rich, you've seen this too, that old myth keeps coming back year after year. I was told that based on your age, you should have that much in bonds. And I'm 50, so 50% of my portfolio is in bonds, and therefore 50% of my portfolio I hold at a loss.
That comes up all the time.
Yes. What have you heard, Rich? What can you add to the list?
Yeah, well, I think what people might look to us for, obviously, is, unbiased advice, personal advice. A lot of people say that they give personal advice. I'm not sure if they do. Unfortunately, I can't control the light, by the way. Sorry. Um, and you meet so many people and they'll say, yeah, I'm 60. That means I should have 60-40 stock bond, 40-60. And I say, everybody's different. I could have 5 people the exact same age, but we'll take the time to sit down and talk to everyone and say, where are you financially, obviously? What are your needs? How will you go into principal? What kind of debt do you have? And very importantly, the bottom line is, how do you sleep at night if you hear the market went down 1,000 points in 10 minutes? And that is, you put that all together, no chart can gauge that, but talking to people and coming up with the things you can quantify and the things such as the sleep at night that you can't quantify, but is very important. You hope that you come up with the best asset allocation for them. And the asset allocation, a good one is basically, very, very important in how you will perform, how your portfolio will perform over the years. And yeah, we don't want to put someone in 100% stock because we like the market. Some people might want that, but in many, many cases, it's balance of some type. And yeah, I think people are they're battered by the 24/7 news cycle, business news cycle. And there's so much information thrown out at them, and and sometimes they hear too much. Well, they heard 5 different things on the same stock. It makes it more difficult for the investor who's trying to go it alone, who's trying to take advantage of some of these very platforms that do work, thanks to computers being so inexpensive and so efficient. And coming back to people such as you, Pat, and I, to say, hey, can we actually sit down and talk to you? And not just the day that we open the account, but will you be there for me when we go into a bear market, which took about 2 weeks to do 14 months ago? I mean, unprecedented what was going on then. And if you were able to talk some people off the cliff while things were looking terrible, and kept them in stocks, maybe reduce their stocks if it helped them feel better, make some changes as far as sector selection and industry to go along with what we thought the economy would be doing. That pays the fee forever, basically. I mean, you've just done such a service to the people, and they're not going to get whipsawed by getting out of the market and then trying to get back in. So it's sort of that day-to-day being there for them and understanding, knowing who they are, not having a million clients.
Absolutely, Rich. Wealth management trumps stock picking or timing the market every single time. Well, are you ready to handle one of our viewer questions, Rich?
Sure.
All right. We have Ralph Thompson from Philadelphia has asked actually a very good question at this point in the market. How should I invest for future inflation?
And the inflation question is good too. I've been a big proponent for a long time now that inflation was not coming back, and it hasn't. And given the deficits and everything else and the growth that we had in the economy up until last March, you would think you would have inflation, but we really didn't. There's a chance now that we will have some inflation, and some inflation is good. The Fed thinks about 2% is good, and I'll go along with that. No inflation is not a good thing, and obviously for anybody who remembers way back some decades when inflation was 14, 15, 20%, that's just untenable, and it killed the market and all kinds of things. Just terrible. So a moderate rate of inflation might be coming based on government spending at this point. That is just, a lot of this government spending that we've had was very necessary to take care of people. And now it seems to be getting somewhat out of proportion, and it might be overdone. But the economy is so productive that we're not concerned about any kind of runaway inflation. So banks do very well when inflation comes up, interest rates go up, and apropos to the guest, insurance companies do well. They can invest at higher rates. Banks can lend at higher rates and have spread between what it costs them for the money, what they receive for the loans. energy does better also because it's sort of a dollar based, and the dollar does better when there is some inflation. So those are a few areas that can do well. And on the other side, utilities, you don't even hear much about utilities anymore, but they can be hit, and they can be stocks that you go to for good dividends, but you do have to be careful that inflation could hurt those companies. And then consumer areas, even consumer staples like a Procter and Gamble, General Mills, can be affected by inflation because the people who buy the products might go to store brands, things like that. So things can change. So yes, good question. There are some things to do on the buy side, and there may be some stocks you could avoid. If you think inflation is really going to become a problem, I don't think it will become a problem.
Thank you. Now, for our viewers out there, if you'd like to send in a question to be asked on air, this is how you do it.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, MONEY, -matters, MATTERS, TV.com.
Welcome back. And now we turn the show over to our guest, John Farley. Farley, as I mentioned, he is a director of the cybersecurity risk for Gallagher, the third largest insurance brokerage firm, and that's even on a global basis. And this is a topic, John, that we all want to hear about. So I'd like to start off with a tough question. I'd like to know what you see as the greatest cyber threat to business today.
Well, thanks for having me, Patricia. Appreciate this. Well, there's lots of threats in the cyber world, but really, and there's lots of ways the hackers can attack you, but their preferred method today is in the form of ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks are attacks where they get the victim company to click on a link or an attachment that contains malicious software. And that software will essentially lock all of your data down, right? It basically forces companies to come to a screeching halt. And that malware was spread throughout the network. So it infects the one person that clicked on the link, but then in sometimes a matter of seconds, it can spread throughout a global network and shut everybody down. So, what happens then, there is an extortion demand by a hacker. And that extortion demand says, pay me $1 million and then I'll give you your data back, right? And it's not always $1 million, but very common, it's a 6-figure sum. So it's not a small sum. I have seen 7-figure demands. And you're faced with this situation of, do I pay this bad guy to get my data back? Nobody wants to fund a hacker, right? To encourage them to come back and do this again. But at the same time, I can't operate, right? And systems go down. So you're faced with this really tough question, and you might pay, you might not. And I'm kind of, on the fence on that, because they're really, each attack is different, and you're really going to weigh a lot of factors there. But in the meantime, your system is down, right? And these ransomware attacks typically take a company down for 3 weeks on average. All right. So picture being down for 3 weeks, right? What does that mean to your bottom line? What does that mean in terms of your contractual obligations if you have to deliver a product or a service? What does it mean to your corporate reputation? So it's a huge issue. And then to make matters worse, hackers have, when they're not paid, they up the ante and they basically say, okay, if you don't pay me, I'm going to release your data to the world. And sometimes that's very sensitive data. That could be HR records, that could be sensitive client data, right? And now you're trying to figure out, will they carry out that threat if I don't pay? And then what does that mean for my clients or my employees? So a really tough scenario there where you're going to have possible extortion payment, and then downtime, business interruption costs that are often multiples higher than the extortion demand. They're sometimes 5-10 times the amount. That business interruption loss is so much greater than the extortion loss. So a really troubling trend. Hackers have been very successful at this scheme, and they're not going away. This attack is just escalating, and we're seeing it happen more and more.
Can I ask a question? Your company, I believe, is big in property insurance. I'm not sure if it's more commercial, more residential. What you might want to tell us about that.
Yeah. So we broker insurance for all sorts of risks. It could be property, it could be liability. But where I focus is cyber risk, because really I've been focused on that because I believe that to be one of the top risks for an organization. And it affects 100% of our clients. Everybody has some form of cyber risk. So we prepare our clients for all sorts of risks, and we help transfer those risks via insurance. But cyber is really where I'm focused, and where we'll start there, but then work our way down to the whole throughout the whole enterprise risk profile of a client to help them transfer property, casualty, and other types of risk.
Let me bring it back to where we are today, John. Has this move to the remote workplace increased or decreased cyber risk for businesses?
It's absolutely increased cyber risk almost overnight. When you think about the pandemic, when it hit, all of a sudden we had organizations launching everybody into home environments without a lot of time to prepare. So those environments were not necessarily secure. We had people using personal devices, right, that were maybe not secure, but they're using those devices to access company data. And then you had people using public Wi-Fi that may not have been protected. Maybe that Wi-Fi network was set up by a hacker, getting you to log on. So we had some of that. We also had insecure systems set up, right? Remote desktop protocol, not to get too technical here, but that is the technology that's used to allow a remote worker to operate and to access corporate data. And many times that remote desktop protocol was not set up the way it should have been, and hackers exploited it. So we saw all these sort of technology failures at the beginning, and to some extent still happening. And on top of that, we had hackers pivoting to sending out phishing emails, right, that were COVID-19 themed. And they would get people to click on links because they were purporting to be from the CDC or the World Health Organization with key information about vaccines or treatment for COVID. And then you even had charities set up, right? These fake charities, hackers saying, click on this link to help contribute to this COVID-related charity. So it was amazing to see how that happened so quickly, and how they tried to exploit people as soon as they landed in the remote environment.
Wow.
Your business has changed, I guess, dramatically over the years, thanks to all the scammers out there and everything that you never would have thought about 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And in fact, the insurance market for cyber, it has grown, but it's also become what we call a hard market, meaning that and rates are going up because these attacks have been so successful. The payouts have been so severe, and we're seeing the insurance market start to pull back a little bit in terms of how much limit they're willing to offer, because many of them have paid their policy limits on those large extortion type claims. So we're seeing a tough market out there, but that market is very robust and a great mechanism to transfer cyber risk.
These hackers are, I'm going to stay on that for a second, but I always hear that they go away when they get paid. And I guess that's a self-fulfilling thing. They get paid that way going ahead.
It's a business model, right? They're going to release your data more often than not for the vast majority of the time, and they're going to get paid, and then they're going to come back again and hit somebody else. If they didn't release your data, the business model fails. Nobody would ever pay. So unfortunately, this thing just keeps perpetuating.
Yeah. Terrible.
Well, John, given that, what can a business do to prepare for an attack? Because it sounds like we have to assume it's going to happen. So how can the business prepare?
Sure. So it's a combination of things. It's technology, right? It's getting the preventive measures in place, right? The intrusion detection systems that you can deploy to tell you that a hacker's in your network the moment they're in, so you can take action to stop the attack and kick them out. So there's that kind of technology. There's multi-factor authentication that has to be implemented to validate who is accessing systems, right? So many organizations don't have that, and that's a great way to prevent. But there's also ways to mitigate harm in the event that the bad guys do get in, because there is no silver bullet. Let's be honest here. There's no 100% guarantee you're going to prevent all cyber attacks. So setting up an incident response plan, which is basically a crisis management plan anticipating attacks, laying out roles and responsibilities of individuals within an organization who are going to act in a certain way and make certain decisions when the attack happens. So that could be, general counsel being involved in that. You can have obviously IT. You can have communications people, someone from the C-suite perhaps, operations people, that all will play a part in a breach response. So if you're prepared and you make the right decisions in the crisis, you really have a good opportunity to keep a bad day and not make the wrong decisions and make a bad day a catastrophic day. So really important in terms of mitigation. And then finally, risk transfer, right? Figuring out what you can do to transfer cyber risk to an insurance policy, and really going out to the market, and figuring out what products are available. So in the event those costs are incurred, you can actually have an insurance policy respond and indemnify you for those costs.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our show, and I want to ask one last question, and let's throw it out into the future. What are the cyber risks of the future, and where do you see this going?
Yeah, well, when I think about the future of cyber risk, I think about emerging technology, because as a society, what do? When a new product comes out, a new technology comes out, we embrace it with open arms, right? And we don't ask a whole lot of questions about how secure that product is. So think about autonomous cars, right? They're already here in some forms, and they're just going to become more and more prevalent. So here's a car that's being, driven by a computer, more or less, right? What happens if a hacker hacks into that computer while that car is moving down the New York State Thruway at 65 miles an hour with a family in it, right? So the world of cyber risk is not just about data and data breaches and stealing identities and things like that. It's now impacting the physical world. And so I worry about that. But I also worry about, the geopolitical conflicts that we have amongst nations, right? And we think about warfare, and what it used to mean is, the country that had the best bombs and the best planes and the biggest tanks were able to win the wars. But now you have, potentially an attack in the cyber space, right? In a few keystrokes impacting critical infrastructure, right? Our power plants, our nuclear power plants, our financial markets, right? What if somebody from Iran, North Korea, Russia, China decides to hack into one of those and take it down? It's just a really interesting dynamic and something I worry about. And I think the top levels of our government have really started to pay attention to, for good reason. So.
Well, I sure hope they are, because John, you've got me a bit nervous, because I'm of the age group that someday would buy an autonomous car. But we're going to have you back again. But as we close our show, I did want to let our viewers know that our next guest is going to be equally interesting. We have Renee Stewart lined up. Renee is the co-founder of LaVolta Pharmaceuticals, and LaVolta Pharmaceuticals works on something that many of Americans are afflicted with, and that is osteoarthritis. So be sure to tune in to hear what Renee has to say. I know you'll find it interesting. So thank you for joining both John and Richard and myself here today on Money Matters. And remember, your money matters.